This information is presented by Bluewater Auto Restoration. Welcome back. This is week 14 of the 2026 Bluewater Auto Restoration podcast. We release new podcasts every Saturday morning. In this deep dive, we look at history of the Ford Model A. Remind to visit BluewaterAutoRestoration.com website.
Absolutely. It's great to be here to get into this one.
Yeah, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
I want you to put yourself in a really specific, almost unimaginable mindset for a second.
Okay.
Imagine you're the creator of a product that hasn't just been, successful. It has literally altered human geography.
Right. It completely changed the map.
Exactly. You didn't just invent a machine. You created something so completely ubiquitous, so fundamentally transformative that you effectively put the entire globe on wheels. You were the undisputed king of your industry. You sold like 15 million units of this thing.
Which is just a staggering number.
It's insane. But then, well, the world moves on. The very roads your machine drives on start to change.
Yeah, the infrastructure catches up.
Right. The consumers change. And suddenly, your world-changing invention is starting to look, frankly, like an antique.
It's a dinosaur.
So how do you follow up a success like that? Today, we are exploring the painful, the reluctant, and the ultimately triumphant birth of the Ford Model A.
The car that really had everything riding on it.
Literally had to save an automotive empire from its own stubbornness.
It's really fascinating here is that we're looking at a moment in industrial history where a titan had to learn how to walk all over again.
Yeah.
The sheer weight of their previous success, the beloved Model T, the Tin Lizzie, was actually their biggest vulnerability.
Because they were trapped by it.
Exactly. To understand the monumental shift that the Model A represents, we have to understand the absolute shadow cast by what came before it. By the mid-1920s, the Model T had been in continuous production for roughly 18 years.
18 years. I mean, I look at this like it's like a highly decorated military general trying to fight a modern war with cavalry.
That's a great way to put it.
They won the last war brilliantly, so they just refused to look at the new tanks rolling onto the battlefield.
Right, they're just sticking to what works.
Yeah, they're saying, hey, the horse is reliable, it eats grass, it's indestructible, like, what more do you want? Meanwhile, the competitors are out there inventing armored warfare. Was Henry Ford just entirely blinded by his own past success? Or did he genuinely have, like, a logical reason for believing the rural utilitarian market was the only one that mattered?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of American infrastructure at the time, his logic wasn't entirely flawed.
Really?
At least not initially. Yeah. He fundamentally believed that the Model T was still the absolute best option for rural Americans. And for a long time, the data supported him.
Because most people were still farming.
Exactly. The majority of America was still agricultural. His priority was accessible pricing and rugged durability over modern features.
Right.
He wanted a machine with high ground clearance that a farmer could fix with, like a basic wrench and a piece of baling wire.
Just beat it up and it keeps going.
Right, a car that could traverse these deeply rutted, muddy wagon trails without breaking a sweat.
Because for the first, 10 years of the Model T's life, there essentially wasn't a paved highway system in America.
No, not at all.
You were driving over glorified tractor paths.
And exactly that utilitarian mindset dictated the engineering. But the landscape of America was literally transforming beneath his tires.
Concrete was being poured.
Tons of it. The country was rapidly modernizing. Cities were booming. A true middle class was expanding. And crucial to this story, governments were building paved roads.
So you don't need a tractor anymore.
Right. Paved roads were replacing those dirt tracks. And while Ford was sort of resting on the laurels of the Model T's incredibly low price point, competitors, primarily the various divisions of General Motors, had completely reverse-engineered Ford's mass production system.
So the unique advantage Ford had, the whole building them faster and cheaper than anyone else magic trick, it wasn't unique anymore.
Not at all. GM figured out the assembly line, but instead of stopping there, they weaponized it against him.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, they took the assembly line logic and applied it to a consumer-driven model. GM and others started offering cars with more powerful engines.
Okay.
They offered actual convenience features like electric starters.
Instead of having to hand crank the engine and risk breaking your arm.
Exactly. And crucially, they offered cosmetic customization. They realized a fundamental shift in human psychology had happened.
People didn't just want a mechanized tractor for the road anymore.
No, they wanted a status symbol. They wanted style. They wanted a car that looked elegant, parked in front of their newly built suburban home.
And within the company, there was a massive civil war over this, wasn't there?
Yeah.
It wasn't just Ford fighting GM. It was a battle inside the boardroom.
Oh, an absolute civil war. You had Edsel Ford Henry's son and the entire sales force looking at the market data.
Sweating bullets, probably.
Yeah, they were watching their market share hemorrhage to Chevrolet, recognizing this as an existential threat. They knew the Model T was a dying platform.
But Henry wasn't having it.
The patriarch stubbornly resisted. He felt that offering minor updates, or simply, continuing to slash the retail price of the T, would be enough to keep the working man loyal.
It really is almost Shakespearean.
It really is.
The visionary founder who can't see the future anymore, and the son desperately trying to grab the steering wheel before they drive the entire company off a cliff.
That's exactly what was happening behind closed doors.
But eventually, you just can't argue with a plummeting market share. The numbers force his hand.
Right, the money always talks.
And so, in late 1926, he finally agrees to pivot. Which leads us directly to the monumental challenge of reinventing the wheel. Or, well, demolishing the entire factory to build a new one.
Yeah, and when the decision was finally made to build a new car, it was declared that they would wipe the slate completely clean.
Totally clean.
Totally. The new vehicle would carry over 0 parts from the Model T.
That is wild to me. 0 parts.
They were essentially launching a brand new automotive corporation from scratch, but attempting to do so at a scale no one had ever seen.
Right, because they're already a massive company.
Exactly. They even went back to the very beginning of the alphabet, reusing the name Model A.
Which was from an older car, right?
Yeah, originally used on their first primitive motor car back in 1903, they used it again to signify this absolute rebirth.
I want to pause on that 0 parts carried over detail. Because wiping the slate clean means you have to rethink literally everything.
Everything, from the ground up.
And the first thing you notice about this new car was the look. This is where Edsel Ford really gets his moment to shine, isn't it?
It is. Edsel heavily influenced the styling, and his vision was just crucial. He insisted on lower, sleeker bodyline.
Making it actually look good.
Right. He wanted the car to be beautiful, to have a sense of motion, even when it was parked.
Which is so different from the T.
It was a stark contrast to the tall, boxy, almost carriage-like appearance of the Model T. This new car looked like a modern, integrated machine.
Yeah.
It was also the first vehicle to carry the famous blue oval logo, signifying a completely new corporate identity.
It actually looked like an automobile, not a motorized buggy. But here's where it gets really interesting to me, and it's something I think you and I and everyone listening just completely take for granted today.
The controls.
The controls. Because today, you get into a rental car anywhere in the world, you know exactly where the gas pedal is. It's on the right. The brake is in the middle. The clutch is on the left. The steering wheel works the same way. But before the Model A, driving a Ford was like trying to operate an alien spacecraft compared to other cars.
It really was its own weird ecosystem.
Can you explain how bizarre the Model T was to actually drive? Because it sounds impossible.
It's pretty funny by modern standards. The Model T utilized a planetary gear set transmission. So instead of a standard gear shift lever, the driver operated 3 foot pedals. But they didn't do what you think they do.
Right.
The left pedal controlled the forward gears. You pressed it all the way down for low gear, and you let it all the way out for high gear.
So your foot is doing the shifting.
Yes.
The middle pedal was for reverse.
Wait, the middle pedal made you go backwards.
Exactly. The right pedal was the brake.
Oh.
And the gas was a lever on the steering column that you operated with your hand.
It's like trying to play a piano instead of typing on a keyboard. You had to relearn muscle memory just for one brand of car.
It isolated their drivers entirely.
I bet.
If you learned to drive on a Model T, you were terrified to buy a Chevrolet because you literally didn't know how to drive it.
You'd crash it into a wall trying to put it in reverse.
Exactly. So the Model A revolutionized the company's approach by finally abandoning that eccentric system.
Thank goodness. They adopted what had become the industry standard. A conventional clutch on the left, a brake pedal in the middle, a foot throttle on the right, and a standard H-pattern gear shift lever sprouting from the floor.
So they finally fixed the pedal so anyone can just jump in and drive it.
Right.
But that accessibility doesn't mean anything if the car can't keep up with those new paved highways we talked about. They needed to invent an entirely new powertrain.
They did. Under the hood, they introduced an all-new, water-cooled, L-head, inline 4-cylinder engine.
Okay, let's break down the jargon for the listener here. What exactly makes an engine an L-head, And why did they choose that specific design?
Sure. So an L-head, which is more commonly known as a flathead engine, refers to the placement of the valves.
Okay.
In most modern cars, the valves that let air and fuel in and let exhaust out are located in the cylinder head directly above the piston.
Right, an overhead valve design.
Exactly. But in an L-head, the valves are located down in the engine block itself, sitting side by side with the piston pointing upwards.
So they're next to it, not on top.
Right. The combustion chamber in the cylinder head just forms an inverted L shape over the piston and the valves.
That sounds incredibly inefficient for airflow, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the air has to come up, take a hard 90-degree turn over to the piston, and then the exhaust has to do the exact same thing on the way out. Why build it that way?
You're entirely correct about the airflow inefficiency. It's terrible for airflow.
So why do it?
It was chosen for brutal simplicity. An L-head engine requires far fewer moving parts.
Ah.
There are no push rods, no rocker arms, no complex overhead camshafts. The camshaft just sits in the block and pushes the valves up directly.
Oh, I see.
It is incredibly robust, very cheap to manufacture, and incredibly easy for a mechanic to service.
Which was still the main goal.
Right. For a company transitioning from the Model T, reliability and cost of manufacturing were still paramount.
Simplicity is key. And even with that L-head design, this 201 cubic inch, roughly 3.3-liter engine put out 40 horsepower.
Which is a big deal.
Right, because it sounds like lawnmower numbers to us today. But what did that actually mean for the driver in 1928?
It meant a top speed of around 65 miles per hour.
Wow.
Yeah. That was a massive, sweeping upgrade in performance over the Model T, which really struggled to hit 40 or 45 miles per hour.
And it probably felt like it was shaking apart at 40.
No, absolutely. The Model A allowed the driver to cruise comfortably at 45 to 50 miles per hour, which was the exact sweet spot needed for those newly paved inner-city roads.
But traveling at 65 miles per hour introduces a brand new problem.
Yes, it does.
If you crash a carriage at 15 miles an hour, you get bruised. If you crash a steel box at 65 miles an hour, you need some serious safety features.
Which brings us to a pioneering moment in automotive safety. The Model A was the first car in the low-priced field to introduce the triplex shatterproof safety windshield as standard equipment.
We have to talk about how this works, because before this, a minor fender bender could literally be lethal just from the glass. Right?
It was horrifyingly dangerous. Prior to safety glass, windshields were essentially just thick plate glass, like a house window.
Exactly. If a rock hit it, or if you had a collision, it shattered into large, razor-sharp shards that would fly directly into the passenger compartment.
A literal guillotine waiting to happen right in front of your face.
Precisely.
So how did the triplex glass solve this?
Triplex glass is essentially a sandwich.
Okay.
They took 2 sheets of glass and bonded a layer of transparent celluloid, like a type of early plastic, between them using heat and pressure.
Oh, that's clever.
So if a rock hits the windshield, the glass itself might crack, but the celluloid layer holds the pieces together.
It doesn't explode inwards.
Right. It prevents the glass from shattering inward and showering the occupants. Offering this technology on a mass-market, affordable car was a revolutionary commitment to public safety.
And they didn't stop at just the glass, did they?
No, they also added hydraulic shock absorbers to manage the suspension,
Nice.
which provided a vastly smoother and more controlled ride than the old leaf spring bounce of the past. And perhaps most importantly, they introduced 4-wheel mechanical drum brakes. Wait, 4 wheels? Did the previous car not have brakes on all 4 wheels?
The Model T only had a brake inside the transmission that stopped the rear wheels.
You are kidding me.
No. If that band snapped, you had virtually no way to stop the car.
That is terrifying.
Very. Moving to dedicated drum brakes on all 4 wheels meant the driver could actually rein in that new 40-horsepower engine safely.
Okay, so we have this massive leap forward. A sleek body, standard controls, an engine that can do highway speeds, shatterproof glass, and actual brakes.
That's a real car.
It is. But for all of these profound advancements, there is one design choice on the Model A that absolutely melts my brain.
Let me guess.
I'm talking about the fuel tank.
The cowl-mounted fuel tank.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a distinct quirk of the era.
Listener, I want you to imagine you're driving down the highway in your modern car. The gas tank is safely tucked away in the back, under the rear seats, or maybe the trunk.
Far away from you.
Exactly. In the Model A, the fuel tank wasn't in the back. It was in the cowl, meaning the tank was situated right behind the engine compartment's firewall, forming the actual dashboard of the car.
Right in front of you.
You're essentially driving with 10 gallons of highly combustible liquid resting directly above your knees.
It definitely alarms modern sensibilities, especially when you consider how the fuel actually reached the engine.
Because there was no fuel pump.
Exactly. There was no mechanical or electric pump. The system relied entirely on gravity.
Wow.
Because the tank was mounted high up in the cowl, the gasoline simply flowed down a pipe directly into the carburetor.
But wait, think about the physics of that for a second. If the system relies on gravity, what happens when you drive up a really steep hill?
That's where things get tricky.
Because suddenly the carburetor is physically higher than the fuel tank. Gravity stops working in your favor.
This was a genuine issue, particularly on long, steep inclines. The engine would literally starve for fuel and stall out.
So what do people do? Do they just get stuck?
Drivers learned a very specific workaround. They would turn the car around and drive up the steepest hills in reverse.
You're joking.
I'm completely serious. Because reverse gear was geared very low, and driving backwards meant the cowl tank was once again physically higher than the engine.
So the gravity feed continues to flow.
Exactly.
I just want you, the listener, to picture a line of beautiful new model as driving backwards up a mountain road.
It must have been quite a sight.
And because the tank is forming the dashboard, the fuel gauge wasn't some complex electrical dial, was it?
No, not at all.
It's just a little glass sight tube tapping directly into the tank. You were literally staring at your flammable gasoline sloshing around while you drove.
Right there on the dash.
It's a perfect encapsulation of brilliant, brutal, terrifying transitional engineering.
It perfectly highlights the friction of the era. They were solving massively complex modern problems like manufacturing laminated safety glass at scale, but the architecture of the car was still dictated by a ruthless desire for simplicity and cost saving. Eliminating a fuel pump saved money and removed a part that could break.
Which brings us back to the boardroom again. Because designing a great car on paper, even with a gas tank in your lap, is only half the battle. Building millions of them at a price a farmer can afford, that is where the real war is fought.
And that war was fought on the factory floor. When we look at the manufacturing of the Model A, we have to examine the philosophy of design for manufacturability, or DFM.
Right.
The founder was obsessed with it. He focused intensely on the mechanical reality of how a car physically goes together, but he had developed a massive, stubborn blind spot regarding how to actually form the metal parts.
This is the battle over stamping versus forging, right? Let's break this down.
During the Model T era, the company had actually pioneered the widespread use of die stamping sheet steel.
Let's explain that for a second. Die stamping is basically taking a thin, cold sheet of steel, putting it into a massive hydraulic press, and using thousands of pounds of pressure to punch it into the shape of a fender or a door panel. Right.
That is exactly the process. It's incredibly fast, it's highly efficient, and it produces lightweight parts.
Makes sense.
It was a huge part of why the Model T could be produced so cheaply. But as the years went on, Henry Ford grew deeply distrustful of stamped metal.
Why?
He began to view it as flimsy. For the new Model A, he declared that he wanted as many parts as possible to be made through drop forging.
And drop forging is a completely different beast.
Oh, completely. Drop forging involves taking a solid, red-hot ingot of steel, placing it between two massive, hardened steel dies, and dropping a heavy hammer down on it to smash it into shape.
It's essentially industrialized blacksmithing.
Exactly.
You're pounding the metal into submission. Now, I have to admit, I want to defend Henry here for just a second.
Go for it.
If I'm a buyer in 1928, and I know I have to drive this car over rocks, through ditches, and across unfinished country roads, I want the drop-forged steel. Drop forging aligns the grain structure of the metal. It makes it incredibly strong. I want the anvil, not the stamped tin can. Why were his engineers fighting him so hard on making a stronger car?
Well, your defense is exactly what he was arguing in the boardroom. He wanted the Model A to be an indestructible heirloom.
Right.
The engineers weren't arguing against the strength of forged steel. They were arguing against the laws of economics and physics. The problem with drop forging is scalability and cost.
Because it's slow.
It's tremendously slow, it's incredibly energy intensive to heat all that metal, and it requires immense machining afterward to get the tolerances right.
Because it's a bit rough when it comes out of the forge.
Exactly. If you try to build a modern, complex car using primarily drop forgings, the retail price is going to absolutely skyrocket out of the reach of the average consumer.
People just won't buy it.
Right. Furthermore, a car made of solid forged steel would weigh an absolute ton, meaning that new 40-horsepower engine would be completely useless.
It's the ultimate engineering dilemma. You can build it indestructible, or you can build it affordable, but you can't easily do both.
Right. His engineers had to fight tooth and nail to persuade him to relent. They had to mathematically prove that they could design die-stamped body panels with complex internal ribbing and curves that provided the structural rigidity he demanded.
Oh, so making it strong through geometry, not just mass.
Exactly. Achieving the strength without bankrupting the project or making the car too heavy to move.
This is such a timeless battle. You see this exact same tension today in almost every manufacturing sector.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about like a high-end furniture maker wanting to use solid old-growth oak for every piece, while the production manager is explaining that they have to use engineered wood veneers if they want to sell more than 10 units a year.
It's the exact same argument.
It's the eternal clash between the purist artisan and the pragmatic manufacturer.
And this friction forced the company to evolve. The era of rigid mass production where you build one simple thing exactly the same way for 2 decades had hit a dead end. The Model A forced the organization into the era of flexible mass production. They had to learn how to retool massive machines, how to compromise on material science, and how to adapt their manufacturing techniques to the demands of a vastly more complex product.
So they survive the internal civil war, they finalize the design, they figure out the manufacturing processes. What happens when you finally pull the sheet off this highly debated, entirely redesigned machine and show it to a public that has been waiting with bated breath?
The response was nothing short of cultural mania.
It was introduced in December of 1927, designated as a 1928 model, and the numbers associated with this launch are just staggering.
10 million people viewed the new vehicle in its very first week of exhibition.
I need to contextualize that. The total population of the United States in 1927 was roughly 119 million people.
That's right.
That means almost 10% of the entire country physically went to a showroom or an exhibition hall in a single week just to look at a car.
The sheer volume of humanity was overwhelming. In major cities, local governments had to deploy heavy police presences just to direct traffic and manage the mobs swarming around the dealerships.
People were that desperate to see it.
Windows were literally pushed in. It was a national event, arguably one of the most significant product launches in American history.
But with that kind of unprecedented hype and demand, you inevitably run into the harsh, unyielding reality of logistics. You can't just manifest cars out of thin air.
No, you can't. The mismatch between public demand and the factory's actual capability to produce the car was severe.
They were behind from day one.
The Model A was to be assembled at the brand new, sprawling Rouge River Manufacturing Complex in Dearborn, Michigan. But production drastically, painfully lagged behind the hype.
Because they didn't just design a new car. They had to build an entirely new industrial ecosystem. You can't just flip a switch and ask a machine that built Model T axles to suddenly start stamping out Model A fenders.
Exactly. Every single machine, every die, every fixture had to be redesigned, built, and calibrated.
That takes months.
And tens of thousands of workers had to be retrained on completely new assembly processes. It took an immense amount of time to get the tooling right and to source the new raw materials.
So when did they finally catch up?
It wasn't until the middle of 1929, over a year and a half after the car was introduced to the public, that the assembly line at the Rouge was finally running at full capacity.
And when the Rouge plant finally hit full capacity, what did that actually look like? What was the output?
They were producing 9,000 units a day.
9,000 cars a day.
It's hard to even picture.
I just want you, the listener, to pause and marvel at the sheer scale of that operation for a second. We're talking about 1929. Imagine the logistics required to feed that beast.
It's an entire city of industry.
You have massive freighter ships pulling up to the docks on the Rouge River, dumping mountains of raw iron ore, coal, and silica sand on one end of the complex. Inside, massive blast furnaces are smelting the steel, glass plants are pouring the shatterproof windows, stamping presses are thundering away. And out the other end of the building, 9,000 complex, heavy, functioning machines drive out into the world every single day.
It really is.
It is industrial poetry.
The Rouge plant was the absolute pinnacle of vertical integration. They owned the entire process from the dirt in the ground to the finished automobile.
Oh, yeah.
And once that massive machine caught its stride, the Model A didn't just conquer the American market, it flooded the globe.
Let's talk about the global conquest, because the sales milestones are almost hard to process.
The momentum was unstoppable. By February 4th, 1929, they had sold 1 million units.
Okay.
By July of that same year, just 5 months later, they hit 2 million.
Another million in 5 months.
By March 1930, 3 million. And when production finally ended in March 1932, they had produced a staggering total of 4,858,644 Model A's.
Almost 5 million cars in just over 4 years. And they weren't just building them in Michigan and shipping them on boats, were they? This was a truly decentralized, global operation.
The car was assembled worldwide to avoid import tariffs and reduce shipping costs. They had assembly plants in Argentina, in Japan, all across Europe.
It was everywhere.
They even established a monumental joint venture with the Soviet Union, where a licensed version of the Model A, called the GAZA, was produced.
The Soviet connection is wild to me. A symbol of American capitalism being built under a communist regime.
And that vehicle actually went on to serve as a vital, rugged scout vehicle for the Red Army during World War II.
Really?
Yeah, its simplicity and high ground clearance made it perfect for the brutal conditions of the Eastern Front.
So the exact same car rolling down Main Street in Ohio is bouncing across the frozen mud of the Soviet Union.
The exact same bones, yeah.
But while it conquered most of the world, it hit a massive, immovable brick wall in one specific market. Europe, and specifically the United Kingdom, was a disaster.
This is where we see a fascinating lesson in the unintended consequences of government regulation on global engineering design.
Right.
The UK market was severely hindered by their specific tax codes. In the UK, vehicles were taxed annually based on their engine size, not just a flat registration rate, or based on the weight of the vehicle.
Okay, explain this to me, because taxing a car based on the engine makes sense if you're taxing emissions or fuel consumption, which we do today. But how did this specific tax code cripple a global manufacturing giant in the 1920s?
Well, the UK used a deeply flawed system known as fiscal horsepower, determined by the RAC, the Royal Automobile Club formula.
Good.
This formula was created way back in 1906. To calculate a car's taxable horsepower, the government used a mathematical formula that relied almost entirely on the diameter of the engine cylinders.
The bore.
The width of the piston, yes. But crucially, the formula completely ignored the stroke, which is how far up and down the piston travels. It was an antiquated formula that failed to account for modern engine design.
So if you build an engine with wide cylinders, the government taxes you heavily, regardless of how much actual power the engine makes.
Precisely the issue. The standard American Model A engine had a displacement of 3.3 liters, which required large cylinder bores.
Right.
Under the British formula, this massive bore equated to 24 fiscal horsepower. The tax levy was a punishing 1 pound per fiscal horsepower every single year.
Okay, so that's 24 pounds a year.
Right. An owner would have to pay 24 pounds annually just in taxes, which was a massive, ruinous sum for an average British worker.
It effectively made the affordable American car a luxury item just in annual government fees.
Yeah.
So how did the company try to solve this? They couldn't just sell the 3.3-liter engine.
To avoid these punitive taxes, the company was forced to engineer a specific, smaller displacement engine just for the European market.
Okay, that makes sense.
They sleeved down the cylinders, reducing the bore to create a smaller 2043cc engine.
So they shrink the engine. On paper, that sounds like a reasonable compromise to dodge the tax man.
In theory, yes. By shrinking the bore, the British formula now rated the engine at 14.9 fiscal horsepower, dropping the annual tax to roughly 15 pounds.
Which is much better.
But there was a catastrophic engineering trade-off. This smaller engine only produced 28 actual horsepower compared to the American version's 40.
And let me guess, they put this tiny 28-horsepower engine into the exact same heavy steel body and chassis as the American version.
They did. They didn't shrink the car. They only shrank the heart of it.
Oh, no.
So now the British consumer is presented with a profoundly compromised vehicle. You have a heavy, full-sized car that is severely underpowered.
It must have been miserable to drive.
Because the tiny engine has to work incredibly hard just to move all that mass, the fuel economy is terrible. And despite the smaller engine, 15 pounds a year was still a relatively high tax compared to indigenous British cars.
It's the worst of all possible worlds. It's too slow to be fun, too thirsty to be economical, and still too expensive to register.
Exactly. It failed miserably to compete in the mass market because it was simply too expensive to run compared to lightweight, purpose-built, British cars like the Austin 7.
Right, which were built for that tax code.
Exactly. They were designed specifically to cheat that RAC tax formula by using tiny cylinder bores and long piston strokes.
Brilliant.
And on the other end of the spectrum, the Model A was too crude and utilitarian to compete as a luxury product for wealthy buyers who didn't care about the tax.
So it's stuck in the middle.
It was a massive strategic failure, dictated entirely by an arbitrary tax formula.
It's incredible how a line of tax code written in 1906 inadvertently forced a company to build a bad product in 1928.
It really is.
But despite taking a beating in the UK, the car was undeniably a massive success everywhere else. And part of that success was that they finally abandoned the old, you can have it in any color as long as it's black philosophy.
Yeah, they absolutely embraced variety. They realized that the market demanded choices. They offered an incredible array of body styles straight from the factory. You had your standard and deluxe coupes, business coupes for traveling salesmen, sport coupes, open-air roadsters, cabriolets, phaetons, two-door Tudor sedans, four-door town sedans.
It's an endless list.
Wood-bodied station wagons, taxi cabs, and an entire line of commercial trucks.
And the pricing strategy was brilliant. You could get exactly what you could afford.
Prices ranged from just $385 for a bare bones, standard roadster without a roof, all the way up to $1,400 for a highly appointed dual cowl town car.
To put that in perspective for you today, adjusting for inflation, that's roughly $9,300 for the cheap roadster, up to about $22,500 for the luxury town car.
Which is incredibly affordable.
You could buy a brand new, reliable automobile for under 10 grand. Because they were so affordable and because the Rouge plant managed to pump out nearly 5 million of them, it created a massive surplus.
And that surplus is critical. When the company eventually moved on to the subsequent Model B and introduced the famous flathead V8 engine in 1932, the story of the Model A didn't end.
No, it was just getting started, in a way.
There were still millions of these robust, over-engineered cars left on the roads, depreciating in value but not in utility.
Which perfectly sets up the second act of this car's life.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the Model A stops being just a mass-produced appliance for farmers and businessmen and morphs into an absolute cultural icon.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a canvas for outlaws, adventurers, and hot rods.
The enduring legacy of the Model A in the aftermarket is arguably even more fascinating than its original production run.
It really is.
Consider the ingredients. You have a chassis that is incredibly reliable, the mechanical engineering is straightforward and easy to modify, and replacement parts are literally everywhere.
You can just find them in any junkyard.
Exactly. This made the used Model A the absolute holy grail for a new post-war generation of car enthusiasts, the customizers and the hot rodders.
And if you are a hot rodder, there is one specific body style you are hunting for in the scrapyards. The 1931 Roadster. Why was that specific car the holy grail?
The 31 Roadster was highly prized because of the power-to-weight ratio.
Okay. It had an open cockpit and no heavy glass windows or steel roof structure, which meant it was significantly lighter than the closed sedans. You take that lightweight body, unbolt the heavy steel fenders, strip off the running boards, drop in a more powerful V8 engine from a later model, and suddenly you have a very fast, very capable, very cheap racing machine.
But the appeal of a cheap, fast, reliable car didn't just attract teenagers racing on dry lakes in California.
Oh, definitely not.
The reliability and the potential for speed attracted a demographic that needed to leave a location in a very big hurry.
You were talking about the outlaws.
Yeah.
The bank robbers. I am absolutely referring to John Dillinger.
The V8 engine often gets the glory in outlaw lore, most famously, with Clyde Barrow writing a letter to Ford praising the V8. But the Model A was the true, dependable workhorse of the early 1930s criminal underworld.
It was the ultimate getaway car.
Its dependability made it a preferred vehicle for getaways. John Dillinger, public enemy number one, famously used a 1930 Model A to escape from federal agents at the Little Bohemia Lodge in Wisconsin in 1934.
And the incredible thing is that this specific car survived. It wasn't scrapped or destroyed. It was preserved and actually sold at auction in 2010 for $165,000.
It highlights the dual nature of the car's legacy perfectly, from a $500 economy car for the everyman to a $160,000 piece of mobster history.
But beyond the criminal element, the Model A became a literal canvas for some of the most famous custom car builders in the world, shaping entire subcultures.
Yeah.
We have to talk about George Barris.
George Barris is perhaps the most famous customizer of all time. I mean, he later built the original Batmobile.
Which is legendary on its own.
But one of his earliest, most iconic creations was a vehicle based on a 1929 Model A Roadster pickup. He called it the a la carte.
The a la carte is legendary. It wasn't just a fast car, it was rolling art.
Absolute art.
He had white pearl paint, purple scallops, a massive chromed grille. It completely changed the idea of what a car could be. It shifted the automobile from mere transportation to pure self-expression.
It was so heavily modified and beautifully finished that it won the prestigious America's Most Beautiful Roadster Award at the Oakland Roadster Show 2 years in a row.
Which is not easy to do.
Not at all. It was featured in movies and magazines, and it really cemented the Model A as the quintessential foundational platform for the entire hot rod industry.
And that cultural impact bleeds over into institutions, too. These cars were so iconic, so representative of mechanical resilience, that universities adopted them as literal mascots.
The collegiate connection is a wonderful piece of its history. At the University of North Texas, they have the Mean Green Machine, which is a brilliantly green 1929 Tudor sedan that has been a staple driving around the field at their football games since 1974.
But the most famous one has to be the Ramblin' Wreck at Georgia Tech.
Undoubtedly. The Ramblin' Wreck is a beautifully maintained 1930 sports coupe painted in old gold and white. It leads the football team onto the field before every home game.
It's an icon.
But it's more than just a cheerleader. It represents the core engineering spirit of the school. The idea of taking something mechanical, understanding how it works, maintaining it, and making it a lasting symbol of resilience.
Resilience is the absolute perfect word, because if we want to talk about the absolute limit of what these machines could endure, if we want to test Henry Ford's obsession with drop-forged durability, we have to tell the story of Hector Kivia.
This is truly one of the most astonishing, almost unbelievable automotive journeys on the historical record.
So I want you to picture this. It's October 1992. This man, Hector Quevedo, along with his son Hugo, decides to take a road trip.
Just a little drive.
Right, but not just a drive across the state. They decided to drive their 1928 Model A from their hometown of Punta Arenas, Chile, all the way to the Ford corporate headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan.
That is a staggering distance of 22,000 miles.
22,000 miles in a vehicle that was, at the time they turned the key in 1992, already 64 years old.
It defies logic.
Think about the physical realities of that. We talked about those mechanical drum brakes. We talked about the gravity-fed fuel tank resting directly over their knees. They had a 40-horsepower engine, and they drove across multiple continents. They drove through the Andes Mountains. Do you know what happens to a 40-horsepower engine at 10,000 feet of elevation?
It's starving for oxygen.
It loses half its power because the air is so thin. They must have been crawling over those mountain passes at 5 miles an hour.
Through mountain ranges, through dense Central American jungles, across arid deserts, and navigating modern American highway traffic.
All in a museum piece.
And what is truly remarkable about their journey is how little mechanical trouble they encountered. The historical reports indicate that the car required only minimal service along the entire 22,000-mile route.
What does minimal service mean when you're driving a 60-year-old car across the globe?
They had a few flat tires, they had to do some basic transmission work while passing through Nicaragua, and routine oil changes.
That's it.
But the fundamental architecture of the car, the engine block, the frame, the axles, held together perfectly.
Wow.
It is the ultimate vindication of Henry Ford's stubborn insistence on using strong, drop-forged steel components. The car survived the journey and is now rightfully preserved in the museum in Dearborn.
It's an unbelievable testament to the engineering. But if driving a 60-year-old car across the Americas isn't strange enough, human ingenuity found entirely new ways to use these platforms that had absolutely nothing to do with paved roads at all.
Right, they went completely off-road.
Let's talk about the Janney rail cars.
This highlights the incredible adaptability of the chassis. A car is just a power source attached to a frame.
Essentially, yeah.
In California, the West Side Lumber Company realized they needed cheap, reliable transport up and down their steep logging railways. So they bought several Model A's, completely removed the steering mechanisms and the rubber tires, and bolted on heavy-flanged steel train wheels.
They literally turned a commuter car into a locomotive.
They did. They used them as agile rail cars on their lumber railways. A single modified Model A could carry about 12 lumberjacks up and down the mountain tracks efficiently and cheaply.
Because it had so much low-end power.
The torque of that L-head engine was perfect for pulling weight up a grade. Some of those specific Jenny railcars are actually still in use today on tourist railways out west.
It's the ultimate utilitarian hack. I don't need a road, I have train tracks.
Exactly.
But my absolute favorite modification, the one that truly shows how desperate and clever humans can be during a crisis, involves the fuel source. We have to talk about the gasogenes.
The gazogenes are a brilliant, if slightly terrifying, piece of wartime ingenuity.
Very terrifying.
During periods of severe gasoline rationing, particularly in Europe during the lead-up to and during World War II, civilian gasoline was simply unavailable. The military needed every drop.
So the pumps are dry.
But people still needed to operate their vehicles for farms, deliveries, and basic transport. So engineers developed systems to modify the Model A engine to run on alternative, locally sourced fuels, specifically wood or charcoal.
Wait. They strapped a wood-burning stove to a car to make it drive. I need you to explain the chemistry of how burning a log makes a piston move.
It utilizes a chemical process called pyrolysis, or wood gasification.
Okay.
They would install a large, heavy metal gasifier unit, essentially a sealed furnace, often bolted onto the back bumper or the side running board of the car. You fill this furnace with wood chunks or charcoal, but here is the key. You burn the wood in a restricted oxygen environment.
So it smolders, it doesn't catch on fire completely.
Exactly. Because it lacks the oxygen to burn completely into ash and carbon dioxide, the smoldering wood releases a thick, combustible vapor known as syngas, or wood gas.
Wow.
Which is primarily made up of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. This highly flammable gas is then filtered to remove the soot, piped all the way up to the front of the car, and fed directly into the carburetor instead of liquid gasoline.
That is absolute madness. You're driving a car powered by carbon monoxide gas that you are manufacturing on the bumper.
It was incredibly dirty, the system was heavy and cumbersome, and it took 20 minutes to get the fire hot enough to generate gas before you could even start the engine.
You can't just turn the key and go.
No, and it drastically reduced the car's horsepower. But it worked. It kept the wheels turning when the alternative was leaving the car to rust in a barn.
A wood-burning Model A. It just proves that if you build the foundation strong enough, human ingenuity will find a way to keep it going for a century.
It really does.
Okay, let's zoom out and look at the whole picture. We've gone from the bitter boardroom battles over replacing a legend to the engineering leap of shatterproof glass and standard pedals, the sheer chaos of the Rouge factory floor, bizarre global tax laws, bank-robbing gangsters, hot rodders, a 22,000-mile road trip, and wood-burning train cars.
It's quite a resume for one vehicle.
So what does this all mean for us today?
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, the story of the Model A offers a profound, almost ruthless lesson in corporate evolution and the inherent danger of immense success.
How so?
Well, the Model T was an absolute triumph. It put the world on wheels. But the Model A proved something much harder. That surviving in a fast-moving, modernizing world requires the courage to destroy your own legacy before your competitors do it for you.
You have to be willing to start over.
They had to abandon the very machines, the very philosophies, and the very product that made them great in order to figure out how to be great all over again.
It really makes you wonder, what Model T are companies clinging to today? What beloved product? What rigid corporate mindset or what outdated philosophy are they desperately holding on to that they should actually be tearing down to build their own Model A?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question for any industry leader.
And on that note, we'll leave you to think about what legacy you might need to leave behind to keep moving forward. And as a quick reminder, our podcasts are available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud.